There'll be a lot of coaches online that tell you how to design an experience. But what I'm going to talk about today and what they won't tell you is how to structure everything that goes around that experience. We're talking about your guest experience, but not just what your guest goes through. It's the structures, the processes, sometimes what we would class as the boring bits that make all of that stuff happen so seamlessly. I work with founders running adventure and experience travel businesses. Think multi-day tours, self-guided trips, trekking, hiking, safaris, expeditions, you name it. But what ties these founders all together is they've got an absolutely incredible product. They've got a beautifully designed experience. But what they struggle with and what I help them with is how you structure the processes and the systems to make that experience work really, really well as you grow, as you bring on more clients, and as you look to put on more trips. Because you can't be the glue forever that holds things all together. That works until it doesn't. Alongside that, and why this video is so important and why I'm telling you about this, is I am the COO of a company called Reconnect. We run corporate transformational retreats, and I help with the structure behind the scenes of that experience. And I have helped build the operations in order for it to be able to run. That's what we're going to talk about today. And I am going to talk about the transformation across the last 2 years of how we run our retreats and how this applies to you and your business. I'm going to walk you through the full journey from that inquiry all the way through to after the guests leave. I'm physically walking you through each of the individual steps. Now, every experience is completely personalized to each different client and each different business. However, the steps that you will take a client through will typically fall under the same bracket. How you do that is completely up to you, and that's where the personalization and the bespoke nature and the customization comes into it. But typically, and what I would always encourage, is that your guest experience or your client experience in its totality has very standard different phases in order to make sure the client progresses through that life cycle to encourage them to stay with you again. Every experience or service business has these phases, but the challenge is most haven't actually physically mapped these. So with that, I'm going to add a bit of context to the situation at Reconnect because it's been a journey. It hasn't been a very, very clean system or process, probably very similar to your business and what your business is like or has been like and how you've grown your business over the years. So that first retreat, when I came on, and this was a couple of years ago, the co-founders had already done some amazing retreats before, but I came on to help run the operations and logistics. And coming in to this one, there was no structure to how it was operated previously. And we could all attest to that. We figured it out as we went along. But that first one, we collaborated on all doing the food together. I was part of the sessions. I ran all of the logistics. I did all the food shopping. And this was some of the stuff that I did with my co-founders, but it was like all instigated by us. We didn't have any third party doing it. And I have done cooking in the past as a chalet host and I like to cook. So something that I jumped into with both feet, but it wasn't something that I would say is my area of expertise. I'm not a private chef. So we were all very hands-on every single part of the retreat before and afterwards. And then coming away from that, when we reviewed it, I'd mapped out an initial structure. We reviewed it and refined it and then realized, okay, you need someone that's just on that side of it. We need to bring a chef in because there's no possibility that we can run it and do the food at exactly the same time. And I think from that, you learn what matters, what doesn't. The second retreat that we ran, we'd brought in a chef. I managed logistics. We had a process. I started to template and structure our communications so we knew what we needed and when, what was going out at any one time. And the experience kept getting refined as we were ongoing. The retreat ran a hell of a lot smoother because we'd brought in a chef from a bit further afield who I knew they didn't know the area, which meant that they didn't know where to go for more local ingredients. And I was still doing a fair bit of back and forth of things that weren't available at the time that we had to go and get from other places. So a learning from that was we were still very much heavily in the organization on site and having to be on site to manage that for when things went wrong or when there were challenges or when we needed things. That was still very hands-on from me. And we had the chefs, different facilitators arriving at different times throughout the weekend. Definitely my stress was a lot less, but there were still things there that I physically couldn't see myself not being on that retreat to manage everything because I just couldn't possibly do that. The feedback afterwards was really good, was really incredible. The guests had an exceptional time, but also there was other minor things that the location and the venue, because it was an eco house, they had their own internal air conditioning system. Some of the bedrooms were down by the pool and the heat was a lot and it couldn't cool down because of the heated pool. And there was just a couple of things that just didn't go quite right. Things that potentially were out of our control, and you could go and get more fans. You're in the middle of the mountains. There's challenges that you come up with that you can't quite solve in that moment, and you provide the best solution that you can. But it's safe to say, learnings from that one, there was more things that we needed to do to structure it, to make it a lot smoother for ourselves. And something that we learned was that, to be honest, we wanted to, especially when it came to the food, the cooking, and the sourcing of all of that, if that could be taken off my plate, especially while we were there, that would have made things so much easier. And that led us to Retreat 3, the one that we've just recently done in April. We looked at a new venue closer to where I am here in Andorra, that was relatively easy driving distance, a slightly more easily located one with guests flying in to Barcelona. The venue was actually a bit further away from the airport than previous ones, but the venue that we chose was miles better than the rest. The team on site handled the food, the menus, the sourcing of the food, the cooking of the food, the serving the food. They hosted because it was their property. It was a managed, catered experience, which for us as a team was exactly what we needed. They knew the local partners to provide all the food. They knew the areas to help us curate the experience and give add-ons that we could possibly want to. So when it came to it, at that point, we acted as that travel agent, sourcing the guest, understanding their preferences, helping curate the experience, and partnering with our DMC, who was our team on the ground, that did an absolutely exceptional job of bringing it all together and communicating how we like to work with them. Took a couple of briefing sessions. We shared with them all the preferences and dietary requirements and what the company were looking for, what the team needed, the ideal spaces. We arrived a day early and kind of really pre-prepared, ran through everything. And it meant that at this one, honestly, it gave me an opportunity to step back, sit and get on with some work. And it's the first time where we learned, especially from this one, how good it could possibly be. The feedback showed, and that guest is interested in openly looking at another retreat for later into this year for another group of directors, which is absolutely incredible. And I can put that down to a couple of different things. One, the relationship with the DMC that we had. Two, the really clear structure and system that we used, or the process that we bring them in on. The communications that we put out were timed thoughtfully. And this is everything that I will go through with you of what we've used. How we structured and ran the retreat, the sessions, the facilitation is the key part of that. But the organization around it means that that's possible and goes off without a hitch. The team on the ground, the fitness sessions, the feedback at the end, and how we structured and scheduled that in already meant that there was nothing that they needed to do. There was no stress that we needed to do in making sure we got those sessions in. They were booked. They were solid. We had a clear report. We fed that back to everyone. To be honest, there's always more you can do, but it felt really clear and structured. And this all to say, that wouldn't have been possible without the systems that we use behind the scenes. We use Zoom and Fathom for all our meetings, Google Docs for our contracts and NDAs, which are then turned into LumenSign. Our communications are all sent out initially via email, and then 2 weeks out, we'll create a WhatsApp group and we kind of keep everything in there. We use Notion for guest information. Our forms go into there. Everything is collated in there, and all those systems talk to each other. I have to say, none of these things are really complicated, but having a consistent set of systems and processes and a defined way of how we work, who's responsible for each of that at each phase, where those roles are, where that communication lines are, decision points, layers of accountability, escalation points. Having all of that set means that we can jump on at any one time if someone's not available to help manage or pick something up if it gets missed, or know what's happening and when, so that it's not completely reliant on one person and living in somebody's head. So with that, let me show you how it all fits together. This is talking to you more specifically on those steps that I have done to add structure to our retreat process and what that looks like and what I've standardized to make sure that we bring guests back again. Now, I will caveat this doesn't just come from the guest experience. There are so many factors that influence this. And what this does do is it gives you a high level understanding of the retreat process. But what this doesn't do is it doesn't give you the in-depth day-to-day flow, because that goes in a lot more detail, whether it's a tour company, whether it's a day experience, whether it's a multi-day trip, whether it's an expedition. There will always be multiple parts to a service. Now, how those will differ depends on what the service is, what the tour is, what the itinerary is, what the experience is, will differ slightly, especially when it comes to the planning, the build-up, and then the on-site delivery might be slightly different. However, the phases in theory would still be the same. You'd still have your sales and discovery. You'd still have your onboarding and planning. You still have the build-up. You'd still have on-site delivery, and then you'd have offboarding and feedback once they've finished. Like, those things really are as a standard. So let's have a look at phase one, which is all about your sales and discovery. As you can see, this is really, really high level. A normal customer journey map that I would map out for other clients that I work with is it goes into more depth as to what the process is, who's involved in that, who's accountable, what the decision points are, what the quality control points are, what the standard communications are, what's automated, what's manual, all of that. Like, there is so much more depth and quality to each phase. Now, also between that, I would probably say the timelines might be slightly different. They might need multiple discovery calls, but typically in its essence, these are the high level touch points that I would go through to go from inquiry through to someone booking. And again, like you said, you're probably speaking to multiple different people over various different discovery calls, but I have to make sure at any point is to go, typically, this is what happens. Now, if we look to onboard them, what happens here? That same contact there would have an onboarding call with me to understand the team goals, any dynamics, who are the key players, who are the contacts that we need to know, who's coming on the retreat, any issues that they faced in the past, more depth than we would probably get in that discovery call we get here. So this really looks into, one, what success looks like for them, how would they like to feel, any concepts, things like that. We go away and then design the retreat. And typically the structure for our retreat, I have to be honest, is really relatively similar in how we structure the days, because we have a set number of days that we would want to put on to provide a transformation. This is something really good to note for your experiences and your trips, to be able to give your guests the best possible transformation, the best possible experience. Can you do it in 2 days? Can you do it in 3 days? Does it have to be a week-long transformation? Like, understanding what is that set amount of time is so important for their success, for them to have an incredible and memorable time. What does that need to look like? Does it have structure to it or does it not? Can we do it in a shorter time, or does it have to look very, very different depending on what's included or what's involved, or where they're actually going? For example, some places might need longer travel time in between from one location to another, and they're doing that by train, and that takes a certain amount of time. 2 days just isn't actually possible. And depending on their experience level or who they are or their fitness levels, that also might not be possible if they're trekking through the desert or through the mountains, because they might actually take longer and they might need recovery time, etc., included in that. So we have to make sure that we are understanding who we have, who they are, any dynamics, any specific goals. And this is on a B2B basis. If it's B2C, this could happen at any point through a form, through a call, through various calls, through a system that you've got. It could be through a curated process. The world is your oyster really on how you actually want to structure that. But having an onboarding call or form, or understanding what this trip is going to look like for them, is so vital. And typically you will have conducted a lot of this before they've booked, but then here you're going into more depth to really curate something for them. Again, then the same thing, we've briefed any DMCs. Like, this is all your, okay, how are we briefing people? How are we understanding the agenda? Who's involved in it? We're locking in those dates. We're confirming with them who they've got coming, any guides. And that planning and logistics part, we're gathering all that information. We're setting expectations with clients so that when we go into our build up, now this phase of time could be, it depends on when you've booked it to when the trip is actually happening. So typically you might do a load of information collection really far in advance, and then you might not actually speak to your clients for 6 months. You might then do something in between to nurture them. And this phase, I talk about it so often, it's a really missed opportunity. And for us, we really carefully plan out when those communications need to be. And we've had changes over the years in this as well. We would always have pre-sessions and a coaching session with each individual before the retreat itself, so they can get to know and familiarize themselves with the facilitators, with the coaches, with the retreat itself, and what space that they would need to be in. It gives them a small flavor outside of just turning up to something and having no idea what's about to happen, because the nature of Reconnect retreats is they're transformative coaching retreats. So they're not just like a typical, I'm going to go away and do some yoga or fitness for a couple of days. And then we build the menus. We get so much depth on what they like and don't like so that we can curate that menu to exactly to their tastes, but also in line with the location, the seasons, and making sure that that is using as natural products as possible. And then typically month out, we'll send them the welcome pack and any flight information, etc., that they might have, travel information. We'll send that out 4 weeks. And then 2 weeks out, we create a WhatsApp group for them to all come on. Typically, because we're doing B2B, you're working with a specific group of people. That WhatsApp group, and you send a couple of communications in the meantime, but that WhatsApp group is when we start to really answer any questions that they might have. And if they haven't had any already, that they've had either on the pre-sessions or through any in-between communications, this is where we come through for final updates, i.e. final weather, transfers, any resources get dropped into this group. So this is just that place for them to get to know us, but also for us to communicate with them really close to the date without overwhelming them with too much information. And then they arrive on the retreat. We've got a set structure. What happens on the site, you'd usually have your facilitator, your fitness trainer, and then myself, obviously the ops lead. At the moment, depending on who the guests are and who the retreats are, I will either be on site as well, or I will be not too far away if needed. But what the goal is, and what we're at a point now where we've got a really good collaboration with our DMC. So while they're on site, typically as an operations person, I don't actually have to be there. And we are exploring options of how that looks in other locations, where what do we need to communicate to the DMC to have them facilitate on our behalf from an operations perspective, and to really be a part of Reconnect while they're there. And then when the retreat ends, they still have the WhatsApp group. Any pictures get posted in there. We have already debriefed them on the retreat to let them know that they will be having a feedback call. So as they come into offboarding, I have got a call booked in with every single client a week after they have come home to get any reflections, any feedback, to understand the experience and what it was like for them. And then I have a separate call with the same contact that we booked the retreat with. So either that's the CEO, a coach, the head of people and culture, whoever that might be, to gather any feedback from them, what they think about it, any thoughts that they have, any reflections. We can then feed back any transformation, and then the insights captured, we give them a detailed report of those transformations that we fed back. We actually send through something to them so they can see it, and then the ongoing change. From that, that's where we confirm their next retreat through that session. So looking at, are there any other groups that would like to go on this? Typically, depending on the size of the organization, there are often other groups and they like to confirm their retreats for the next year. So that's where we've already got that. Or there's always opportunities that they can either have a follow-up session within their business. They can do a couple of months coaching for different people. So we've got solutions that support them ongoing that you don't necessarily have to have confirmed by this point, but we've got a way that we can nurture them and offboard them slowly towards that, collecting any feedback, insights, testimonials, sharing images, and it builds into this beautiful process that's really easy because we know at any point in time, and with my detailed map, that I know what's going to happen. If I'm not available to do it, then someone else is able to really easily pick that up and do it. And it's not reliant on one person, but there is areas of ownership, and it shows where the value is through each different stage and how that's structured and how that's maintained throughout. The reason I wanted to walk you through this is because these things aren't specific to what we do at Reconnect. The same phases of sales and discovery, onboarding, pre-trip communication and that preparation, that build up, the actual on-site facilitation itself, and then wrap up offboarding and then building that loop back to that nurture, sales, discovery. It's an entire client lifecycle, and it lives within every service and experience business. The difference as to whether they're successful or not, it comes down to how detailed or structured that you map it and how successful and supportive it is to you. The thing I see with most travel businesses and founders that I work with, it's not that they don't have a good product or a good experience. They have something absolutely incredible that's completely unique to who they are as a business, their location, the types of experiences that they offer. And it's something that stands out among so many. But the common things that let them down isn't the trip itself, it's the systems and support that go around these trips and the internal and client processes that help the trip maintain its profitability, make it a success, make it scalable, repeatable, and bring clients back again. They often use their trip management software like FareHarbor, Bookin. There is so many. You could even use traditional project management softwares like ClickUp, Monday, whatever you'd like to use in line with your CRM. But that's really good. But if you're using them, but you don't have the experience mapped out, that process and system that is still living inside someone's head, those systems aren't set up to truly support the entire guest journey. When it's living inside your head or reliant on a particular person, when that person leaves, or if something was to ever happen to that person, or if you as the founder decide that you don't want to do as much of the day-to-day delivery, you still want to be involved by design. That you've not set your business up necessarily to become the next Intrepid of the world. Maybe you have. Whether you have or you haven't, but you want to enjoy the business that you do and you don't want to be the glue that holds it all together, these things are vital in being able to help you do that so you don't burn out as you grow and everything doesn't consistently rely on you. Mapping your guest journey and the processes, the systems, the touch points in more depth than just the high level of what I just showed you on that visual, the depth underneath that of who's responsible, who's accountable, who's involved, what's automated, what's manual, what are escalation touch points, what are decision touch points, what are risk factors, what is a wow moment, what is something that our client needs to do, what's something that we need to do, what's something that potentially sits outside of this, how do we handle those scenarios? All of those things, when understood, they don't have to be restrictive. They can add personalization and layers of flair. But if we have that set structure of what good looks like, it always means that we have the possibility of being able to deliver on that. And then if we're not, we're able to zone into where specifically that is to find out where we can improve it. It means that we don't really have to be guessing or going based off I think or I feel every time, because we know we can see. And then when we do get busy, it's really easy for us to manage that, because at any one time we can zoom out, have a look at where all of our guests are in this journey and know specifically what's supposed to happen next and what we need to do and what our team need to do if we've got one. To finish off, if there's one of those areas that I could say that I see most people forget about, is this post-trip offboarding feedback loop. Now, people struggle and they send out feedback forms, or they're trying to get testimonials from guests about the time that they've had in order to encourage repeat bookings and understand when they can come back again. They're leaving that question of repeat bookings up to chance, understanding who their guests are. And most of the ones I've spoken to said, I just don't have time to think about that. But if we map it into our guest experience. Map that understanding into our onboarding, really curating that so we get to know who those individuals are, not just by selling them a journey, but actually getting to know them, who they are, what they're interested in. We can then actually collate that feedback along the trip, speaking to our guides, speaking to our DMC partners, speaking to our clients maybe throughout the trip if you have someone that is close to it. And then offboarding is rounding that up, sharing any thoughts, feedback, understanding what they enjoyed, what they didn't, what type of things they'd be interested in. Has that changed from when you initially spoke to them? And did they want to book in their next trip already? You can already confirm when you've got this structured. Imagine what that could possibly do and how much more insight you can find from your guest, how much more you can tailor your marketing messaging to attract either new clients, similar clients, or you can attract those clients back for different or new types of experiences. But not just that, you can even close clients before their trips barely even over for something going into next year. Understanding this doesn't leave your repeat bookings up to chance. At Reconnect, it's helped us secure clients retreat on retreat, coming back from one service to another, moving up our value ladder of our various services. Imagine what it can do for you. I'll see you in the next one.